We saw this massive increase in polyemployment where you're doing small shifts, but also you're doing it across multiple employers. So that you stitch together your own flexibility. And so effectively, what is happening is casualization of shift work or this gig economy moving from some of these platforms that existed in early 2010s and 2020s. This is now moving into retail, into healthcare, into hospitality, where these employers are providing flexibility for people to stitch together schedules that work for their lives.
Welcome to the Future of Less Work, the podcast that's piecing together the puzzle of the changing world of work, one question at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and with me today is Silvija Martincevic, CEO of Deputy, a workforce management platform that is helping millions of hourly workers and employers navigate the evolving landscape of shift work. Welcome to the Future of Less Work, Silvija.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was actually really excited to talk to you today because we always talk about the future of work, not always, but mostly in the context of office workers and knowledge workers. And we talk about things like work from home debate, return to office debate. And when we talk about shift work, right, and hourly workers, a lot of those are location specific or it's very different kinds of industries. So what's that piece you're working on?
You are absolutely right. We spend so much time talking about return to office, not return to office, yet for 80% of world's workforce that work on their feet, hourly workers, they don't have that privilege. They have to show up to the hospital. They have to show up to the retail store. They have to show up to the restaurant. And so this is what Deputy team obsesses every single day. We think about how do we improve the world of work for hourly workers across these industries that really keep the world moving. And we've been doing this for 15 years all over the world. Deputy is used by 350,000 workplaces in 100 countries. And every single day, we hope that through our technology, hourly workers, nurses, retail workers, workers in factories get better work satisfaction, more flexibility, and more compliant pay.
So I'd love to dive into that because we're now in the space of the 5 years post when COVID hit, right? And taking a look back, I know I've been arguing that it's not about work from home. It's actually about flexibility. What does flexibility mean for people whose jobs are tied to location?
And we wholeheartedly agree with you. About a few months ago, we did a survey of over 1,000 hourly workers in Europe, in Australia, and in US, and then created a word cloud. What do hourly workers want? The one word that was in the center of what they want, that described what they want from their work, was flexibility. And so let's just go and think about what does flexibility mean for you and me, folks that are, let's call us desk workers or office workers. Well, if something happens, if our child is unwell or we need to go take care of, take care of our elderly parents, we can just reschedule our work around that. We can get off of Zoom or we can move meetings around and we can go and take care of that. But if you are a hotel cleaner or you are a nurse in an elderly care facility, you don't have that privilege. And so, what we are seeing, the way that flexibility shows up for hourly workers is the ability for them to have predictable schedules so that they can integrate their life around that. And also, more and more, what flexibility means is micro shifts. And in our latest report, we publish a report every single year where we analyze the state of shift work, and we see this prevalence of micro shifts. So specifically what it means, those are 4 to 6 hour shifts that workers now want want to schedule rather than, and again, like why is this happening? It's happening because um, the face of shift work is changing. Majority of shift workers today are Gen Z and millennials.
Yeah, so hold on. So I'm gonna slow you down here because you know so much that you're kind of jumping ahead. So first of all, when we talk about shift workers, right? That sometimes they're highly educated, like you talk about, for example, medical professionals, right? But it could also be people that come in to do low barrier to entry jobs, right? But the idea of flexibility is to allow them to shift the shifts, right? But basically combine, right, their work needs with their life needs in a more flexible way. And so this idea of micro shifts is, to me, that's a very, very interesting new concept, because historically part of the fact that there was no flexibility is because employers said it was like a take it or leave it shift structure. So, I will assign you to shifts. These are the shifts. Um, you can't step out for a few hours in the middle of the day, or you can't start in non-shift hours. Micro shifts breaks that down basically, right? So so is that an employee need for flexibility, or is that a financial need for doing more or doing a couple of things at the same time or combining shift work with other jobs?
Here is what we are hearing. Again, majority of shift workers today are Gen Z and millennials. And in fact, Gen Z are now predominant generation that works these shift jobs. And this generation has a very different relationship to work. Again, we said that what they want out of work, number one desire is flexibility. So, whereas in the past, businesses scheduled their workers 9 to 5, right? That's how we worked, that's how our parents worked. And Gen Z is rejecting that. So, what we're seeing, what they're asking for are these, we're calling them micro shifts. They're flexible work arrangements. They're 4 to 6 hour shifts. So let's just see how could that work? That Gen Z mom starts working and maybe works 9 to 12, and then takes care of her kids, picks up her kids, or or does other things that she needs. And then she works another shift in the afternoon, 3 to 6, for example. And whereas, 3 or 4 years ago, we didn't see much of that. This has been over the last 2 years, 2 or 3 years since COVID, the most requested feature on Deputy across tens of thousands of businesses that use our platform. And we think,
The businesses agree because they have to, because there's no other choice, because I know a lot of shift employees, those are areas we see huge turnover.
yeah, I think there's two reasons why businesses are starting to offer this flexibility. One is um, because we effectively have been at full employment, right? When
Yeah.
you look at the unemployment rate across the developed countries, 3 to 4% unemployment, that is full employment.
Yeah, so you're basically saying I can't find anybody. Basically, the people that come, they determine the
That's
terms,
exactly right. But
right?
then even when you attract that Gen Z or millennial worker, she is also telling you, I'm not accepting these shifts that are, 9, 10 hour shifts. And so it's both to recruit people, but then also to keep workers retained, because there's huge cost in, in having to replace shift workers. And on average, when we look at our data, on average, shift workers change their jobs every 8 to 10 months. So just imagine if you are a business that employs, 50, 100 shift workers, they turn over every 8 to 10 months. That's a massive
Yeah,
cost of.
that's more than 100% turnover per year. Yeah.
And so we think that both this, the face of shift workers changing, they're younger workers that have different relationship with work. They want flexibility. So many of them grew up as Uber, and these other sort of.
Exactly. They have alternatives. It's what I tell a lot of these employers, right? They say, well, I can't offer flexibility, which one you're saying is not true, right? But also, the second point is it doesn't matter if you think you can't. It matters is they have alternatives. And some of it's in the gig economy or in the independent economy. So we see that's really great to hear that we're seeing the adaptation. Do some of the people work only part-time because of the micro shifts? So I'm taking micro shifts, but I'm not building them up to a full-time job?
We certainly see some of that, but we also see folks using deputy technology to work to be poly-employed. So what this means, we saw this massive increase in polyemployment where you're doing small shifts, but also you're doing it across multiple employers. So that you stitch together your own flexibility. And so effectively what is happening is casualization of shift work or this gig economy um, moving from some of these platforms that existed in early 2010s and 2020s. This is now moving into retail, into healthcare, into hospitality, where these employers are providing flexibility for people to stitch together schedules that work for for their lives.
So why would an employer that needs cashiers finally has a person that walked in the door, why would they let them go do shifts for something else if they can keep them within their own boundaries?
Well, it's not that they would let them, right? It's if they need a cashier and that cashier that they found can only work 9 to 12, they may prefer to just take that rather than not have anybody, right?
Yeah, that I understand. But then why would that cashier now go and create for herself another piece of employment, what you're calling the polyemployment, right? By providing other shifts somewhere else.
Well, here is what we need to think about. The um, allocation of labor, of this particular labor that is transient often, it's quite inefficient. I mentioned at the top of the our conversation that 80% of world's workforce are hourly workers. Yet a majority of this workforce is still not digitized, right? So there's still massive amount of inefficiency and massive amount of just hours that are wasted on trying to stitch together schedules via Excel spreadsheets and via 5 phone calls and 10 emails. And so many businesses, when they bring deputy on, they come effectively from paper. And so, what does this mean? Well, this means that oftentimes they have no shows because somebody is sick or something happens, and then they need to send emails and text messages. And just imagine if you're a business owner that has a retail store, and now you don't have anybody to open it
Yeah,
up,
and you're losing money
and
because,
it's 5 in the
there
evening.
isn't, yeah, clearly.
Exactly. And so, what we are seeing is that so much of this work still is very much lacking technology. And now that Deputy and other platforms are effectively doing, what Workday did for office workers, we're effectively bringing digital tools so you as a shift worker can now have all of your work schedules, pay, leave, your communication, the way that you're communicating with your bosses and with your colleagues. You can swap shifts, you can request leave ahead of time, you can rejigger your schedule so that it works. And then you can see ahead that if that one workplace doesn't have as many hours for you as you need, you can go find other work. And that's good. It's good for businesses because businesses are getting workers during times that they don't have. And it's good for workers because they can find extra work if that one employer doesn't have hours for them in the afternoon when they're available, they can find that work elsewhere.
Yeah,
So
so basically what you're saying is we're seeing shift workers create their own, um
opportunities.
yeah, yeah, basically, I was gonna say full-time, but I stopped myself. Basically the amount of hours that they need, but they create them potentially by micro shifts in more than one place.
Exactly, and in a way that makes it flexible for them, that works around their life.
Do you think that's a generational thing? Do you think it's because you're seeing more young people that are more attuned to the ability to use technology to do that?
100%. We think that Gen Z in particular, this is the digital and millennials to some extent, they're digitally native generation. Everything happens at a click of a button. And also remember they grew up, in 2010s, during the Great Recession when so many of them saw their parents lose their houses, lose their jobs. And I think growing up during that period, um, had this psychological effect on them. And we see this, right? There's so many articles written about that Gen Z just has a different relationship with work. They want flexibility, they want to work for mission-driven companies, and maybe that kind of, loyalty where you worked for one employer for 10, 20, 30 years and then received a pension,
Yeah,
that's
that's not a maybe. That's gone. That's not even a maybe anymore. But I think what we also know is it's the flexibility, but it's also and the ability to kind of control, right? But it's also the fact that they understand that their job security is not dependent on someone else, a profession or employer. It's dependent on themselves and whatever they are able to tailor together, whether it's relevance and skills or um, tools for employment.
That is absolutely right. But we don't think that it's generational change alone. There's the macro factors that are happening, right? This notion of full employment, even when stock market is jittery up and down. We we have been since COVID subsided. We have been effectively at full employment, and labor markets remain incredibly tight.
So
And
let's talk about technology because I agree with you, and I actually don't even think that that's going to change. I think there are a lot of reasons why we're still going to see need for people. But here's the other argument, right? If you bring in technology, and we see automation in retail, we see
yes,
cashier jobs disappearing, we see food jobs disappearing. And I know we balance it out. We say, but you know what? Other industries are happening, right? We have growth in e-commerce, stockers, orders, movers. How do you see the impact of technology on shift economy?
so I think that is a very, very important question. And of course, AI has effectively completely changed the game for any business, large and small, over the last couple of years. And it's been so interesting. I mentioned we do our state of shift work report every year. And so we can then measure these trends and what is the sentiment of shift workers with some of these technology trends. And so over a year ago, when all of us for the first time, heard about these AI tools coming to the forefront, we saw a really, really skeptical sentiment that was happening amongst shift workers. So over a year ago, close to 70% of shift workers were quote unquote afraid of AI, very skeptical, negative sentiments about what will happen to their jobs. To your point, so many of us envisioned, what does that mean for retail? Will there be robots that are going to be, serving us in restaurants or so on and so forth?
Yeah, because it's not just AI. I mean, we talk about AI these days because AI kind of moved in to think for us, if you will, or write for us, right? But we think that right behind the corner, we're going to see the better dexterity of technology that is physical, right? And so
That's right.
that's another space that is taking over jobs, if you will.
That's right. And a year ago, as we all reported so much about this new technology, again, 70% of shift workers were apprehensive, and specifically apprehensive about AI impacting their job security. Fast forward now, just short 12 months later, the numbers flipped. Our state of shift work showed that now 63% of shift workers view AI as a positive tool.
How is that possible? Why? What's it doing for them?
That was a very, very big surprise for us as well. How are they now suddenly seeing it as a positive tool? And what we found is that they see this technology as an enabler rather than a threat. And we think what's driving that is that so many, early on when we didn't know what the technology was going to do, of course, when there is uncertainty, there is fear. But now that we spent 12 months playing with it, watching what's happening, I think shift workers are realizing that desk work is going to be, given the nature of large language models, desk work is going to be impacted much faster, much sooner, and not necessarily the service jobs. So think about
Okay. Okay,
around.
okay, it's interesting because my head went in a different direction, which I'll share with you in a second because what you just said is, yay, technology is eating up all the other jobs. We're still the people that everybody needs, which is okay, for the time being, but like we know, right? Technologies around the corner will be able to bring in, we believe, robots and physical hardware that will be able to do some of the jobs that we haven't replaced yet. Um, so so it's not a good idea to say this is somebody else's problem. Our job's safe. I don't know if there is a safe job as defined by it won't change. I was kind of hoping you'd say something else, frankly. I was hoping you'd say, we talk about AI as an economic mobility technology because it's not expensive machines in the hands of capital owners. It's actually something you can do. And sometimes shift workers do the jobs they do with lower barriers to entry just because life happened, as opposed to they didn't get right the opportunities. Maybe they couldn't complete school. Maybe something else was in the way. And so I was kind of hoping people could see the potential for economic mobility.
So perhaps we're not there yet. We do not see that in the data, but here is an interesting bit though that we did see. And of course, we believe that shift work absolutely is knowledge work too. You think about that, nurse that works in the elderly care center.
Yeah.
Absolutely, she knows that she can be enabled via via AI taking notes as she is taking care of elderly
Yes.
patients. And but the main point is this. I think that the positive sentiment that exists now is is being driven by the fact that they now know a whole lot more how AI can enable their jobs, not how it can be a threat to their job. And so what we're seeing is that if you're a masseuse, if you are a nurse, if you are a hotel cleaner, if you're a plumber, those folks that work on their feet with their hands, they know that that's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
But they are seeing that some of these tools can be helpful in the palm of their hands. We are seeing that. We're not seeing the mobility sentiment yet, that could help them effectively go into other industries. But we are seeing that this software is not going to come to for their jobs. It's going to help them be more productive in their current work. So we
Yeah.
are seeing that.
Yeah, that is actually great. So Sylvia, you've been doing this for quite some time. You think about the next transformations, right? If you look down the road a number of years, what are going to be the biggest transformations for shift work?
We think that this notion of shift work effectively turning into gig work is a massive, massive trend that's not going away. Again, COVID accelerated some of that. The generational shifts, where Gen Zs are now 30%, they're the highest generation that's currently working. And we think this notion of polyemployment, where they are stitching together their schedules so that they can have more flexible work, we think that is here to stay. And businesses that want to attract Gen Z and millennials will need to provide that flexibility, but that's just here to stay. And if you don't have technology to enable microshifts, to enable swapping of shifts, to enable more easier communication with your shift workers, you're going to be left behind.
So I get well, you're basically saying that that's a people-driven, movement, and I wonder because gig also has whether it's true or not, this idea that you're all the time, running after the next job, trying to find so it's like not stable and it's not solid. Do you think that's a good trend? Is that something we want? Or maybe I should ask, what do we need to do to make sure it becomes something that's,
Yeah.
that's positive?
Yeah. When I think that what workers are saying, they want more flexibility, but at the same time, they are also saying that they want more income predictability. And in some states today, in United States, there's certain states where a worker can show up to work. That means that that worker had to pay for daycare, pay for gas to get to work, wake up early, and then show up to work. And that employer can say, you know what, it's going to be a really busy day. I don't have the full schedule for you. You're just going to work for a couple of hours and then you can go home. In a lot of states in America, that still is the case.
It's legal. So basically, I think I have an 8-hour shift. I come in, you send me home after 2 hours because it's a slow day.
Exactly. And so workers really, really struggle with that, right? That kind of unpredictability is not okay. And so what I certainly hope that technology can do, and by the way, businesses are not doing that because they're bad actors. Businesses are just doing that because, right, they're seeing that it's slow. And what I hope happens with technology, again, I mentioned that while 80% of workforce is shift workers, not a lot of this shift work is digitized. And what I hope as more technology comes into these businesses, the businesses themselves can be more thoughtful and smarter about what kind of sales are they expecting. So we think one of the important trends is going to be technology adoption so that businesses can provide that flexibility and can provide income predictability, which is good for them too. Because
Yeah.
if you cancel that worker a few times, that worker will say, you know what, this is not a predictable job for me. I'm out.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, that's also why the microshifts are valuable both ways, but they need to be, yeah. Okay, awesome. So I have this last question I always ask in my conversations. We're used to giving answers, but I actually wanted to ask you, what is the question you think we should all be asking ourselves these days about the future of work?
That's such a beautiful question. And I will answer it in a way that I think truly provides the essence of what Deputy is trying to do. The question that I would ask is, how do we ensure dignity at work for every worker, regardless if she is working with her hands on her feet, at her desk, in her office? And I think that for many hourly workers today, because they don't have transparency, they don't have flexibility, they don't have the tools to be more engaged, you know, and more productive at work. Oftentimes that also means that they don't have dignity at work. And I was raised by two shift workers. My mom worked in a shoe factory for 40 years. My dad was a truck driver for 40 years. And oftentimes I saw uh, what that meant, not knowing if they were going to have a shift or not, being afraid that they were going to lose their job. My mom sometimes brought shoes home to sew because she wasn't able to sew all of them at the time that she had at work. And so that's the question that I would ask. How do we ensure dignity at work for everybody? because we spend more time at work than any other place. We spend more time at work than with our families. And if we are happier at work, we're going to have we're going to be better citizens, we're going to be better husbands and wives, we're going to have a better community. And so effectively, that is what we do at Deputy. We ask ourselves, how do we build thriving workplaces for people that have historically been forgotten, underserved, and oftentimes invisible?
Wow, I think that's actually wow. Thank you for that. So, thank you, Silvija, for joining me today. For more about Silvija Martincevic and Deputy, check out the links in the podcast description. Thank you for joining us on The Future of Less Work, where we're piecing together the ever-changing puzzle of work, one conversation at a time, but the conversation doesn't end here. Every question we ask, every piece we uncover brings us closer to understanding how work can and should change, right? And remember, the new social contract is a win-win between people and organizations. Your best people work not because they have to, not because you tell them to, not because you measure them on it. They work because they want to, because by working for you, they're achieving their purpose in life. Until next time, keep exploring, asking those questions, and see you next week.